Committee will come to order. Appreciate our panel's patience. And we will start with the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Duckworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been somewhat aghast at the tone of this hearing, and being a freshman member, perhaps I will learn over time. But, you know, my father, who worked from the age of 14 and lied about his age to enlist in Marine Corps and build a life, lost his job at 55 and was on unemployment insurance for a very, very long time. In fact, he maxed out his benefits. And he didn't not find work because he was lazy. He did not find work because he did not have a trade or a skill. He was a business executive. He couldn't find work because he was 55 years old and no one would hire him because he was overqualified. I watched that man collect grocery carts to return them for 25 cents a pop. This was an honorable man. I was on food stamps, and oftentimes those food stamps provided the only meals that I ate throughout my teenage years. I hope you don't think that I look like someone who is lazy and on government handouts. I have a question, Ms. Carter. You, in your testimony, you said that we've reached a point in society where it is no longer honorable or desirable to learn and perfect a trade skill. You also say in your testimony that an unintended consequence of benefits is substance abuse. I'm going to ask you two questions. The first one is with regards to receiving government benefits being linked to substance abuse. Do you have children in college, or did you go to college and receive Pell Grants or subsidized student loans or anything like that yourself?
No.
You did not?
No.
Do you think, then, for other people's children who are on Pell Grants, that we should have them give a urine sample prior to receiving those government funds for education?
I didn't say anything like that. That's not anywhere near what my testimony was about. We have a problem in our county. We do not have enough employees to fill jobs. We consistently hear unemployment is so high, there's no jobs for the middle class. We have jobs, we don't have workers.
Your testimony actually says, and I'm reading it verbatim, an unintended consequence of benefits is substance abuse. I think that
That's true.
I think that there are many people who receive benefits who are not drug addicts and are abusing drugs.
My statement doesn't say 100% of people have drug problems. In our county, we have a significant drug problem when employers release people because they test positive for drugs, they have accidents in the workplace. They are accepted into the unemployment program with no question. That doesn't correct their problem, and it doesn't support unemployment.
And I've worked with veterans for a very long time, and veterans are a community with a very high unemployment rate. I think for the 20 to 25-year-old age group, it's twice as high as the same age group in the general population. I would think that they have perfected a trade and a skill, and that they are very honorable. So I don't understand how we connect people who are on unemployment, who are on unemployment because they're there through no fault of their own, are people who are not willing to find a trade or accept employment. When I know many, many, many thousands of veterans try very hard to find employment and no one will hire them, yet they have a trade and a skill. Have you tried to hire veterans specifically and tried to recruit among the veteran community?
I believe that we have. We haven't personally. We place ads if we're looking for people. We work with our local Job and Family Services unit to make a match with someone who's looking. We don't have those people applying for jobs. We can place an ad and have 0 people apply for a job.
And you think that's because they're probably out abusing drugs and not wanting to develop a skill, and not because you've not done a good job of reaching out to a community like veterans who have extremely well-trained, who are extremely well-trained in trades and certainly have been able to perform in some pretty severe conditions.
You're misrepresenting what I'm saying. It's not about 100% of people. It's about a large percentage in our county that have these issues and, again, are being supported by government programs. If there are definitely people that require the assistance. Nobody has said that's not the case. But there's also, again, a grand cases of abuse. And again, we are trying to grow the economy. We're trying to provide jobs.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt because I'm running out of time. So do you think then that we should only drug test those people that have a problem, or are you saying that we should drug test 100% of people who are on unemployment? Because if it's not 100% of the people that have the problem, why would you trust 100% of them?
I'm saying that the government should not be providing benefits to people who are spending the money on drugs and that are not providing, or not working.
I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman.
More if you'd like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My next question is for you, Dr. Stone. One of the things that I have been able to work on that I'm very proud of in the state of Illinois is actually incentives for employers. I think that employers who hire someone who's been unemployed for example, more than 6 months, or employers who hire someone such as a veteran should be rewarded for taking that chance. Because when you have someone who's an infantryman, it's hard to figure out how an infantryman is going to fit into your business, or how someone who fixed tanks will fit into your business. Could you talk a little bit about a different type of program, perhaps not the unemployment insurance, but how you feel the effects of incentives for employers. In Illinois, we provided, when I was Director of Veterans Affairs, $600 per every employee who was a veteran that a company hired. It's up to $5,000 now. Could you talk a little bit about the employer benefit side to reward employers for hiring the unemployed?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's a very good point that you raised, because we talk about some of the problems of the long-term unemployed, or the people that don't look that attractive when they present themselves to the employer. And if the employer can be given some incentive to take a chance on that person, which is the way I interpret how your program works, then there's going to be a good percentage of those people that they take a chance on that are going to turn out to be better workers than they look like they are, but they need the chance.
Thank you. Dr. Mulligan, could you speak a little bit from an economist's perspective on incentives for employers and how you feel that might work in terms of helping with the unemployment problem? I mean, if the insurance is not, the unemployment insurance is not the answer.
Incentives for employers, fit into the calculus. I talk about the reward to working, and it includes fringe benefits, things that come on the employer side. So if there were a subsidy for hiring, that would increase hiring. If there were a subsidy for having people on the payroll, that would reduce layoffs. It would have those kind of effects. And as economists, we kind of know how to quantify that. Until you tell me how big the program is, I can't tell you how big the effects will be, but I know the direction.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank the gentlelady for her questions and for her service and your family's service to our country. We certainly appreciate that. It seems to me we got this quandary. I would agree with what both sides of the aisle said. Most people do want to work; they want a job, but yet the incentives are such. If the real world experience that Ms. Carter related in her testimony, I believe, was 8 out of 10 people she interviews for potential employment at her company decide that it's just not worth it, even though it's $12 an hour starting pay plus benefits. And so that's what we're trying to get at. And I love the graph that I think Dr. Mulligan put up, where it shows that, most people want to work, but they're also rational, smart people. And if in fact going to work means they're going to lose financially, then that's the quandary we're in, and we got to try to address it. Let me just do a couple questions for Mr. Stone. Excuse me, Dr. Stone. You talked about a balanced approach to dealing with our problem. So, do you support raising taxes on who, and if so, how much? What kind of tax increases would you employ?
I support looking at the tax expenditures, the tax loopholes. That gets talked about in the context of
which one specifically are you referring to? We're all against loopholes. That sounds like something bad, but tell me which specific ones that you think make sense.
That's a tough decision,
but you got to have
as witnessed by the fact that we still have all of those loopholes.
Yeah, but you don't have the political implications that we we might have as members of Congress. As an economist, which one specifically would you get rid of? Which expenditures, loopholes, whatever, credits, deductions? Which one would you go for?
Look, on economic grounds, the big ones that are the hardest to do politically, employer the health care, the home mortgage deduction, all those things are ones that you want to look seriously at. That's where money is, but those are politically tough, and economists have problems with them. Economists have recommended alternative ways of approaching that issue, but
Do you support raising marginal tax rates?
we supported the increase. We supported letting all of the upper income Bush tax cuts expire. So yes.
So you supported raising taxes on middle class and
Well,
in effect
that
business
would-
owners like Ms. Carter, who is a LLC or not a C corp.
A lot of people's definition of middle class would not go to $400,000 a year of
Do
income.
you support additional revenue from that? So let's say you would have got all those tax increases that you were the 2001 2003 tax increases would have expired. Those tax cuts would have expired. So in essence, raising taxes on all those brackets. What additional taxes aside from loophole, or do you support additional marginal tax increases?
We don't have a program of tax increases or a program of spending cuts.
What I'm trying to
We've
get at
talked
is
about
you
few
talked a
things.
lot about contractions and things that would contract the economy. It seems to me, and you talked about how government spending is. We've been austere. I mean, I would argue, been the last thing we've been is any type of austerity in this government. We've never seen so much spending. But you talked about contraction, how that impacts demand, how that impacts the economy. Raising taxes on job creators, how is that going to help grow jobs and improve the employment situation that we all want to improve?
The spending cuts that I talked about were spending cuts.
No, but you talked about spending cuts, and in the same breath you talked about, with Mr. Cartwright, you talked about a balanced approach, and you've just told me in a balanced approach you preferred tax increases and you preferred raising taxes on everybody when this so-called fiscal cliff debate we just had, instead of just top market. You supported all the marginal brackets going up.
No. I didn't. I said the marginal rates on incomes above 250 and 125. Not
Okay. And my question was, do you support further marginal tax increases?
well.
You won't answer that one.
That
And I'm wondering how if you think contracting, by not spending some, we're going to hurt the economy, and yet when you take money out of the economy by raising taxes on small business owners, how that's going to help promote jobs and increase employment. I can't get the contradiction here.
First of all, almost all of the deficit reduction that we've done so far has been on the spending side. There's been about $1.5 trillion.
Doctor, how can you say we've done a deficit reduction? That's all in the out years. We haven't done anything. We're spending more in discretionary spending this year, and certainly more overall spending this year than we spent last year. And last year we spent more than we spent the year before. And 2 years ago we spent more than we spent 3 years ago. And 3 years ago we spent more than we spent 4 years ago. So how have we cut spending? Do you not agree the government's bigger today than it was 4 years ago? We're spending like $3.6 trillion. In 2007, we were spending $2.8 trillion. Last time I checked, even as a Republican, I can do that math. Last time I checked, that's a lot more.
The measure we would look at would be spending as a share of GDP relative to the size of the economy. You need a metric. You can't just talk about dollars. And it's true.
That is huge. Spending, the economy has been contracting for the last 4 or 5 years, just finally started to grow at that wonderful rate of 1.5% after all the spending we have done. That further confirms. So spending as a percentage of GDP is way up because GDP has been down. That's what's killing our economy overall.
A large amount of the spending that's gone up in the past few years has been spending that has to do with emergency, with temporary spending, temporary programs. The budget caps that are in place.
The very temporary programs we're talking about today that have been a disincentive to work. Exactly.
Well, I don't agree that they've been a major disincentive to work, but I agree that they've been an important. My view is that they've been an important contributor to keeping the recession from being worse than it was.
Well, it's tough to prove a negative. What we can prove is we're spending a lot more today than we were 4 years ago. That's obvious. That's a simple subtraction, mathematics, addition problem.
And over the past couple of years, spending as a share of GDP is going down. And the spending that I was talking about was was, in my testimony, was spending on goods and services by Federal, state, and local governments, which has been very contractionary. We had some support for state and local governments in the Recovery Act, but we stopped doing that, and the budget constraints that state and local governments have faced has forced them to be very austere. Huge numbers of jobs have been shed, and the output and the purchases of goods and services from state and local governments is way down.
Let me do one other thing before turning to the ranking member for a second round. Dr. Mulligan, let me ask you, the big thing that's coming, starting to impact right now, and employers are starting to look at, is the Affordable Care Act, some Obamacare Affordable Care Act. CBO estimates that this piece of legislation will lead to 800,000 fewer Americans working in the economy by the end of this decade. Do you agree that this is going to be an impediment to job creation, going to cause the loss of jobs? And if so, would you agree with CBO? You think they're right, they're wrong, that they got it or missed it, or what?
Well, CBO, I've seen that 800,000 number. I've seen something else they put out, too, very early. I was impressed by this. They did some work on marginal tax rates from the sliding scale aspect of the exchange subsidies. And they talked about marginal tax rates in the neighborhood of 25%. That would be one of the biggest squares in my chart. Yeah. It's not there yet. But when they did their 800,000, it's not the way I would have done it. When they did their 800,000, they ignored that 25% disincentive. They have not calculated. I've been working with them, and they have not calculated how many millions of people will have tax rates over 100% under Obamacare. Maybe that's something they'll do, but they haven't factored that in yet. So I'm pretty sure when you factor that in, you're going to have to say there's going to be more than 800,000 jobs lost. I wish I could bring you numbers today. It should be a lot more. How many more? How many millions? I can't tell you right now. But
can you hazard a guess?
I think it would be on the order of what the Recovery Act did. I mean, the exchange subsidy are kind of like that COBRA subsidy in my graph, but on steroids. So I kind of think of it on the order of the Recovery Act, which means multiple points on the unemployment rate.
Wow.
Or non-employment rate. I'm not sure whether these people will go into unemployment or out of the labor force, but something like that.
Real quick before turning to Mr. Cartwright, Doctor, your thoughts on the CBO assessment that 800,000 fewer people are going to work as a result of the Affordable Care Act?
I think it raises an issue of two groups of the population we haven't really focused much on in this hearing. The first one is the elderly. I think one of the reasons that CBO came up with this number, I may be wrong, but I think one reason it came up with this number is now those people who want to retire early do have access to health insurance. And so this may be a major group upon whom this has an impact. And I don't know whether it's necessarily a combined marginal tax rate. It just may mean at that point, with some modest amount of 401k, with health insurance, they can make it to 62 or something and retire for a few more years. And mind you, the average couple now gets benefits. They retire at 62 for about 27 years, for younger people going towards 30.
Yeah.
But there's another group that we haven't talked about, which is on the other end of the spectrum that doesn't really have access to almost any of these welfare programs, and that's the young. And I gave statistics in my testimony also about what's going on with the labor force among the young and younger workers. And that's not an issue of the social welfare programs. In many cases, particularly young men, especially some young women, but especially those who don't have children, don't really have access to almost anything in the social welfare system. I think our systems do a pretty bad job in terms of dealing with their needs for the right type of training or the right type of job opportunity if they're not going to college. I think the whole program of apprenticeships needs to be examined. And so I hope this committee, beyond just this issue of combined tax rates and everything else, will start to look at also what's happening to employment patterns among the young. I don't have an answer there, but I think that's an issue worthy of consideration, I say, and it goes beyond just what social welfare programs we have, because in many cases they don't have access to them to help in any way.
Thank you. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Carter, we certainly don't mean to ignore you, and I wanted to ask you a question. What's the name of your company?
Carter Machine Company.
Okay. And what's the town that it's in?
Galleon, Ohio.
Galleon, okay. And is it your testimony that you have up to 20 jobs available there right now?
We could, yes.
So if I called up your company, they would say they're hiring right now?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And now, Dr. Stone, I want to follow up with you. And I promise not to interrupt you. Why is it important to talk about spending as a percentage of GDP?
Well, because it's a measure of how much we're spending relative to our capacity to engage in all kinds of things. That it makes no sense to talk about 1950, how many dollars we were spending on something in 1952 compared with how many dollars we're spending on it in 2013, because there's been so much price change in between.
Okay.
It's not just a matter of real, and the economy's been growing, so we can support a certain level of spending in a bigger economy than we can in a smaller economy.
Okay. So that's why it makes no sense to talk about us spending more dollars today than we did last year. Okay. Now, I also wanted to touch on something called automatic stabilizers, a key tool I think you've been touching on, used to ease the consequences of negative economic shocks. In response to a downturn in the economy, automatic stabilizers such as unemployment compensation or even food stamp benefits automatically increase as jobs are eliminated and more people become eligible for the benefits. These benefits provide critical income support, obviously, to unemployed individuals, and they also ease financial burdens while the recipients seek permanent employment. Dr. Stone, do you agree that unemployment compensation and food stamp benefits are effective forms of support to the individuals and families struggling during economic crises?
They're very effective, and they're very supportive of the economy. That's the automatic stabilizer role, is that they keep spending at a higher level than it would be if these people were left on their own.
So do you agree then that businesses and employees of businesses at which food stamp and unemployment recipients spend their money are positively impacted by those programs as well? That's
right. In a weak economy, that's extra demand. And if we were back in the 1999 economy when the unemployment rate is closing in on 4%, there'd be questions about spending here crowding out spending there. But that makes no sense in today's environment when there's so many idle resources.
Well, the fact of the matter is, if you don't have a job, you don't have income, you don't really have the option to put money in the bank. Generally speaking, beneficiaries of these programs spend their unemployment or food stamp benefits just as quickly as they receive them, causing a boost in demand nationally for goods and services in the economy. Dr. Stone, is that correct?
That's right. Congressional Budget Office finds that to be one of the highest bang-for-the-buck programs of the ones they look at in a weak economy like we've been experiencing.
And you mentioned the Congressional Budget Office. Is that a partisan outfit?
No.
Okay.
They've had Republican and Democratic directors. They work for the Congress, the whole Congress.
Now, Dr. Stone, a recent study by Wayne Vroman examined the stabilizing role of unemployment compensation during the 07-09 recession. He found that the unemployment compensation, it closed 18.3% of the GDP shortfall that was caused by the recession. He also found that extension of benefits played an important role in that stabilization effect. We can't ignore the positive effects of those benefits, nor can we ignore the harm it would cause to the unemployed during an economic downturn if these benefits were not there to respond. Now, Dr. Stone, isn't it also important to note that the increased budgetary cost associated with the expansion into these programs is temporary and projected to decline as a share of the GDP?
Yeah, and decline in dollar terms, too. The number of unemployed will fall as the economy improves, and Congress has always let emergency unemployment programs expire once the economy is strong enough. They've just never done it any time in the past when the unemployment rate was higher than 7.2%, and we're not expected to get below that in CBO's projections until sometime in 2014.
Well, thank you, Dr. Stone. I appreciate your comments.
Real quick, Dr. Stone, if food stamps and unemployment insurance increase demand and are stimulative in the economy, why shouldn't we just increase them even more? Why not raise? I mean, I just fail to grasp this logic that says, oh, these are the best stimulus programs we can do in a difficult economy. Well, if that's the case, we should be pumping a lot more money into these programs.
They have high bang for the buck. There are obviously political constraints on how high you would want to push those
Do
things.
you think there should be an asset test required before an individual can receive food stamps? Do you agree with the fact? Well, let me ask this way: do you agree that waiving the asset test for food stamps is a good thing?
I don't have I'm not an expert on food stamps.
Well, I mean, right now it's an income. There's an income requirement. That's it. If you don't have income, you get food stamps. There used to be an asset test. In other words, today in some places you can have 3 brand new cars sitting in the garage, but you don't have an income. You're eligible for food stamps. Do you think that's appropriate?
In many of our programs where we have asset tests, they've not been.
This is why the lady in Michigan who won the lottery could still get food stamps. She didn't have an income, but she just, she landed a little bit of cash there all of a sudden. Yet she can still get food stamps. Think that's right?
There are particular examples.
But there used to be an asset test. There is no longer an asset test in some situations. Do you think that's appropriate? Simple question.
There are problems with asset tests, and there are problems when you get rid of asset tests.
Do you think
and
there
there's
should be a work requirement? No, let me ask the other way. Do you think it's appropriate for this administration to waive the work requirement for able-bodied adults receiving some type of social services, some type of welfare recipient?
In a situation where it's in an economy like
law that
we've
had
been
been around for 16 years, signed by President Clinton, bipartisan support.
Yes, President Clinton, whose economy produced.
Do you think there should be a work requirement?
Waiving it at a time when jobs are hard to find makes perfect sense to me.
Let me ask you, Dr. Sterling, do you think a work requirement would help with this phenomenon you described in your testimony, where people who are unemployed for a significant period of time, it's not good for that individual, not good for that family? Ms. Carter's talked about how it's not good for the community, good for her county. Do you think it would be helpful if there was a work requirement that may help them retain some of those skills as they're trying to find that employment that we all know everyone wants to find? Do you think that would be helpful?
I think it would be helpful to try to move in that direction. I think work requirements are very hard to implement. That's one reason, for instance, through devices like the Earned Income Credit, it effectively has a work requirement because you don't start getting the benefit until you at least do some work. Even though I recognize, that at some income level.
I understand they're hard to do. I mean, lots of things that are worth doing are hard to do. That's just the way life is. Any goal that's worth achieving is never easy. That's life. But my question to you is, do you think it helps if we have that, helps those very individuals you talked about in your testimony?
I would move in that direction, but one way I would do that is probably trying to provide more money in work supports and less money in consumption-oriented programs.
Fine, but there's a work requirement. That's now being waived in all kinds of places across the country. Dr. Mulligan, do you think unemployment compensation and food stamps are actually stimulative to our economy?
No, they're not stimulative. I think there was a couple of mistakes, I think, made here. It was said that the CBO showed and the CBO found, and Mr. Roman showed, that UI and food stamps are stimulative. They didn't. They assumed. The CBO assumes that it's stimulative.
So there's no empirical, there's no real research that confirms what Dr. Stone just described.
What there's research on, first let me say, there's research in a couple areas related to this. Number one, research shows pretty clearly that the poor and unemployed tend to quickly spend what they have on basic needs. Mr. Cartwright mentioned that. It's true. They quickly spend basic needs.
That's common sense. We all understand that.
That's why the programs have intrinsic value, but that's different than stimulative value. You have to recognize that some of them, not all, Mrs. Duckworth, I think, didn't characterize it right. It's not true about all, but some are going to work less. And working less is a ticket to spending less. They kind of go together. Unless you're in that 100% tax situation, they go together. So it actually leads to less aggregate spending. I think what gets forgotten is these programs have to be funded. Somebody's got to buy the government bonds or pay the taxes, or maybe there's some other program that gets shrunk, and those people are going to spend less, and you have to count that too.
Yeah. It's the opportunity cost thing I learned.
So the aggregate spending declines. And the thing that CBO, the way they make their assumption is they look at studies of purchases. Dr. Stone mentioned government purchases, but you weren't asking me about purchases. You were asking me about transfers. Transfers are very different. Purchases means you pay a guy to work. You pay a guy to build a highway. You pay a guy to help build a military airplane. Transfers means you pay a guy for not working. Mm-hmm. And really, they're kind of the opposite. But CBO and some other economists have picked up on the purchases studies and say, hey, purchases expanded the economy, therefore transfers must expand the economy. And that last piece of the logic is backwards.
Yeah, well said. I want to thank you all for being here today. We had a great hearing. Your testimony was very much appreciated. Sorry we had to have a break in there, but that's the way this place works. There's votes called at certain times, and when it's time to vote, we have to do that. So this committee is going to continue to look at this issue. And again, we appreciate your time, and we stand adjourned. Thank you, Matt. All righty.